A soldier thought the war was over, until he found twin girls shivering on a park bench in the snow. What happened next shocked the entire city. The night was silent except for the crunch of Jack Miller's boots and the low growl of his German shepherd, Rusty. Then came the sight that froze him in place. Two little girls, barely 5 years old, huddled together, their lips blue, clutching a torn backpack like it was their only lifeline. He pulled off his coat, draping it over their fragile shoulders. But what they whispered about their missing mother led to a secret darker than the war he had left behind. Snow fell in restless sheets over Riverside Falls, muffling the sounds of the city and wrapping the park in a pale, frozen silence. Jack Thompson trudged along a narrow path, half buried under white drifts, his boots crunching against the ice-crusted ground, while his breath came in slow, visible clouds. He was 45 years old, broad-shouldered, with a frame that had once borne the weight of military armor and now carried the quieter burden of memory. His face was angular, weathered by war and winter alike, and though his jaw was square and firm, a streak of gray in his beard made him look older than his years. Deep lines ran across his forehead, carved there by nights without sleep and the endless struggle with ghosts of battles long finished. His storm-gray eyes rarely rested on the present. Instead, they drifted constantly toward the past, replaying moments he wished he could erase. Since returning from Iraq, he carried with him the invisible scars of PTSD, nightmares that startled him awake, the ringing of explosions echoing in his skull, and the suffocating loneliness that pushed him out into the cold night just to breathe again. Beside him padded Rusty, his German shepherd, a 6-year-old with a black and tan coat that gleamed even beneath the dim park lamps. Rusty's ears were always alert, his amber eyes sharp, but there was a softness in the way he moved near Jack, as if the dog had inherited not only the training of a K9 partner, but also an instinct to guard his master's fractured soul. Rusty bore the faintest scar along his hind leg, a reminder of a deployment injury, yet he never faltered. For Jack, Rusty was more than a companion. He was an anchor. In moments when the noise in Jack's mind grew unbearable, Rusty's steady presence reminded him that not everything in the world was broken. The park that night was deserted, benches and trees cloaked under heavy snow, the frozen fountain in the center casting long shadows in the lamplight. Jack had chosen this path deliberately. It was quiet, predictable, a place where the rhythm of his boots and the steady puff of Rusty's breath could drown the roar of distant memories. He often came here when sleep eluded him, when guilt over comrades lost gnawed at his chest. Yet something in Rusty changed as they rounded the curve by the fountain. The dog stiffened, muscles taut, his nose twitching against the icy wind. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, the sound of a sentinel catching a foreign scent. Jack stopped, his heart quickening. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his hand brushing the handle of the flashlight on his belt. Rusty did not answer with a bark, but with action. He surged forward, paws striking the snow with sudden urgency, pulling the leash so hard Jack had to jog to keep up. They broke through the veil of falling snow toward a weathered bench beneath a flickering street lamp. There, huddled like fragile shadows, were 2 small children. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The figures were no more than 5 years old, twin girls with golden hair plastered wet against pale faces. They wore thin dresses unsuited for the winter, fabric clinging damply to their trembling bodies. Their bare legs were streaked with dirt, and their small hands clutched each other in a desperate attempt to hold warmth. Their lips were tinged blue, their eyes half closed, as if the night were trying to swallow them whole. Beside them lay a tattered backpack, half buried under snow, its seams frayed and stained with mud. Jack froze, the soldier in him colliding with the man. He had seen children in war zones, scared, abandoned, lost among rubble, but never had he thought that here, in a quiet American town, he would witness the same raw cruelty. His chest tightened, a knot forming where compassion and anger intertwined. He pulled in a breath, steadying his voice, and crouched low so as not to startle them. Hey, it's all right," he whispered, his tone soft but firm. Rusty, sensing the fragility of the moment, lowered himself beside the bench, his body pressed close to the children's legs. The dog's warmth radiated like a living blanket, his amber eyes calm and watchful. One of the girls stirred, lifting her face from her sister's shoulder. Her freckles stood stark against her chilled skin, her lashes wet with tears frozen in place. The second girl whimpered softly, but she leaned closer into Rusty's fur, as if instinctively trusting the dog more than the night. Jack felt his throat tighten. He shrugged out of his heavy military coat, the one he rarely removed because it was like a second skin, carrying both pride and pain, and draped it gently over their small shoulders. The coat swallowed them whole, but at least it shielded them from the biting wind. He could feel their frail bodies shivering beneath the fabric, their bones too sharp, as though hunger had hollowed them. The sight cracked something inside him. He thought of comrades he had failed to save, of civilians he had carried bleeding from collapsed buildings overseas. Always there had been loss, and always he had been left with the guilt. But tonight, here, he had a chance to prevent loss, to break the cycle. Not tonight, he whispered to himself, though the words were carried away by the wind. He pressed his palm against the coat, steadying the trembling forms beneath his storm-gray eyes burned as he looked around the empty park, the snow still falling relentlessly. Someone had left these children here, deliberately, and that thought filled him with a cold fury deeper than the winter itself. Rusty lifted his head, gave a single sharp bark, as if to punctuate the truth Jack already knew. This was no accident. The children had been abandoned, left to the mercy of the storm. Jack tightened the coat around the girls and drew a long, shaking breath. His heart was pounding, but his resolve was clear. He had found them in time. Rusty pressed closer, his flank against their tiny legs, his steady warmth drawing sighs of relief from the twins. Jack realized then that the three of them, man, dog, and children, were bound together by fate under the dim light of that single street lamp. He knew one thing for certain: their survival tonight meant his own redemption. The wooden cabin creaked under the weight of the storm as Jack Thompson pushed open the door, his boots dripping snow across the worn floorboards. The place was small, tucked away at the edge of Riverside Falls, a retreat built less for comfort and more for survival. The walls bore scars of age, patched here and there with mismatched planks. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner, its surface rusted but still functional. Jack set the twins down gently on an old couch draped with wool blankets, then moved quickly to the stove, stacking kindling with practiced hands. Within minutes, flames licked upward, filling the cabin with the first hint of warmth. The smell of burning pine mixed with the damp chill clinging to the children's hair and clothes. Rusty shook himself by the door, scattering snow, then padded over to the couch, settling protectively at the children's feet. His black and tan coat steamed faintly from the heat, his ears flicking as though attuned to every sound inside and out. His presence drew the twins closer. Ella leaned her head against his flank. Emma clutched the edge of the blanket with trembling fingers. Jack pulled off his gloves, his hands rough and scarred, veins raised like ridges from years of labor and combat. He busied himself boiling water for Coco, though his storm-gray eyes kept flicking toward the girls, unsettled by their silence. For the first time, he studied them in the light. Emma, the older by a few minutes, had freckles scattered across her pale cheeks, her golden hair tangled and damp. She carried herself with a fragile composure, as if trying to shield her sister despite her tiny frame. Ella, by contrast, seemed more openly vulnerable, her blue eyes wide and brimming with tears, her thin lips quivering each time the wind rattled the shutters. Both were far too thin, their arms like sticks beneath their sleeves, and their skin carried the gray pallor of children who had known more hunger than comfort. Jack set 2 chipped mugs of steaming cocoa on the low table before them. "Drink slow. It'll warm you from the inside," he said softly. Emma hesitated, then guided the cup to her sister's lips first, watching Ella sip before tasting her own. Jack's chest tightened at the quiet act of sacrifice. He had seen soldiers do the same with canteens and desert heat. Give to others first, endure thirst themselves. Survival, it seemed, was not just for the battlefield. As they drank, Jack turned to the battered backpack lying slumped against the chair. The fabric was frayed, seams splitting, dirt ground deep into its fibers. He pulled it closer, his instincts telling him that whatever story had led the children here, this bag might hold pieces of it. Rusty raised his head, sniffing the air, tail twitching once as if confirming the suspicion. Jack unzipped the pack carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Inside, he found what looked like the remnants of a childhood interrupted. a one-eyed teddy bear, its fur worn down to threads, crumbs from stale bread pressed into the seams, and at the bottom, half hidden beneath a crumpled scrap of paper, lay a small USB drive. Jack frowned immediately. Its casing was warped, one corner melted, the acrid smell of chemicals still clinging to it. He turned it over in his hand, recognizing the deliberate damage. This wasn't a toy, nor was it something a child should be carrying. He had seen drives like this overseas, sometimes destroyed to erase intelligence, sometimes smuggled out in desperate secrecy. His pulse quickened. Emma's small voice broke the silence. "Mama gave it to us." Her words trembled, but her green eyes locked on the drive with a focus too mature for her years. She said, "Never lose it. Keep it safe, even if it looks broken." Jack crouched beside her, the drive still warm in his palm from the fire. "Your mother gave this to you? Why?" Emma swallowed hard, glancing at Ella before answering. "Because the bad people, they said she wasn't coming back. They told us she would disappear." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she drew the blanket tighter around herself. Ella whimpered softly, curling into Rusty's side. Jack felt the weight of the statement settle in his chest. He had heard children in foreign lands whisper similar fears about soldiers, gangs, or men with too much power. Yet, here it was again, in a quiet American town, spoken by a girl barely old enough for school. He looked down at the melted USB, the faint scent of acetone still clinging, and knew this wasn't a simple case of neglect. Someone had wanted this destroyed, and Anna Miller had trusted her daughters to carry what she could not. The stove popped as a log split, showering sparks behind its iron grate. Jack's mind raced, the soldier in him parsing details, the man in him aching for the innocence stolen from these girls. If Anna had discovered something, whatever it was had been dangerous enough to silence her. He thought of his own daughter, the one he had never raised because war had consumed his life, and the guilt pressed against his ribs. Maybe fate had placed these twins before him because he still had a chance to protect someone. Rusty broke the silence with a low huff, shifting his weight. His amber eyes fixed on Jack as though waiting for a decision. Jack closed his hand around the USB, the metal biting into his calloused skin. "All right," he murmured more to himself than anyone else. "We'll find out what's on here, and we'll keep you safe." He looked at the twins, huddled together under his heavy coat, and saw in their small, frightened faces the reflection of a promise he had once made to protect those who couldn't fight for themselves. A promise he had broken too many times, but not this time. The snow outside battered against the windows, but inside the cabin, the fire held its ground. Jack reached for another blanket, draping it gently over the girls. His storm-gray eyes lingered on the USB resting on the table, scorched yet intact, and he felt the old knot of duty tighten in his chest. This was more than a mystery. It was a call. The fire in the stove had burned low, but the cabin was warmer now, its shadows softened by flickering light. Emma and Ella had drifted into a fragile calm beneath Jack's coat, their small bodies still tense, as though even in sleep they were bracing against the cold world outside. Jack sat at the wooden table, the scorched USB lying in front of him, its faint chemical odor mixing with the scent of burning pine. He rubbed a calloused hand over his beard, storm-gray eyes narrowing. He had faced firefights and ambushes, but the mystery of two abandoned children weighed heavier than his combat gear ever had. Rusty lifted his head from the rug near the stove, amber eyes watching his master, with that uncanny attentiveness only a dog could carry. The German shepherd's ears flicked, as if he too was listening for answers in the silence. Jack leaned back in the chair, sighing. "What the hell are we caught up in, boy?" Rusty gave a low huff, as though echoing his unease. When the girls stirred awake, Jack crouched beside them, his voice low and steady. "You're safe here, but I need to understand. Tell me about your mother." Emma looked at him, her green eyes clear despite the fear that trembled in them. She clutched the teddy bear missing one eye, holding it like a shield. "Mama's name is Anna," she whispered. "Anna Miller. She worked at a place—" "North Star?" Ella tugged at her sister's sleeve and added, her voice smaller. "She always smiled, but lately she cried at night. She said bad people wanted her to stop asking questions." Jack felt the knot in his chest tighten. North Star. The name was familiar. He had seen it on flyers around town, a social service center that claimed to help struggling families. He nodded slowly. And what did she say to you before she left? Emma's fingers twisted the teddy bear's ear. She told us, if anything happened, to find a policeman or a dog with a vest. At that, Jack froze, his gaze sliding toward Rusty. The shepherd had worn a K-9 vest during his service years, and Anna's words struck like a direct arrow into his conscience. The soldier in him processed it quickly. Anna had anticipated danger, had left instructions, and the USB was no coincidence. The man in him, however, felt chilled. Fate had placed these children in his path because of Rusty, because of that bond forged in uniforms and vests. He wasn't just sheltering them. He had been chosen, whether he wanted it or not. Jack knew he couldn't do this alone. There was one person he trusted enough to share this with, someone who had once shown him that not all battles were fought with weapons. He reached for the old landline phone on the counter, the receiver heavy in his hand, and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. Caroline Brooks answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but laced with fatigue. "Hello?" Jack's throat tightened for a second, but he forced the words out. "Caroline, it's Jack. I need your help." An hour later, Caroline's car pulled up outside the cabin, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Jack opened the door, watching as she stepped inside, brushing frost from her coat. Caroline Brooks was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with auburn hair pulled into a loose bun. Her hazel eyes were sharp, quick to read a room, but beneath their focus lay a warmth that had carried countless broken families through dark nights. Her skin was pale from long office hours, and faint lines traced her mouth and brow, marks of battles fought not on battlefields, but in courtrooms and social service offices. She carried herself with brisk determination, the kind of woman who had long ago sacrificed comfort for purpose. "Jack," she greeted, her tone clipped but not unfriendly. "You don't usually call unless it's bad." She noticed the twins curled on the couch, Rusty's watchful presence beside them. Her posture softened immediately, a rare crack in her armor. She crouched to the girl's level, her voice gentle. "Hi there, I'm Caroline. You're safe now." Emma blinked at her, wary but intrigued, while Ella clung to Rusty's fur. The shepherd wagged his tail once, as if offering his own introduction. Jack handed Caroline the USB, his jaw tight. "Found this in their bag. Burned, smells like chemicals. Their mother, Anna Miller, gave it to them before she vanished. They say she worked at North Star." Caroline's hazel eyes darkened as she turned the device in her fingers. "Anna, yes. She emailed me about a month ago. Said she found discrepancies in North Star's financial records. Kids listed as transferred but with no receiving facility. Payments that didn't line up. She thought it was fraud, maybe worse." Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the weight of the rifle he wasn't carrying still heavy in his stance. "And now she's gone." Caroline nodded grimly. "She never showed up for work. I tried to check on her, but by the time I did, her apartment was empty. Landlord said she left overnight. No forwarding address. It didn't feel voluntary." The room fell quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Ella sniffled softly, and Emma pulled her sister closer, whispering something Jack couldn't hear. Caroline glanced at them, then back at Jack, her voice low. If she trusted her daughters with this, it means she was desperate. Whatever Anna found, it scared her enough to think she might not come back. Jack felt the old instinct stirring, the one that had pulled him through firefights, the one that refused to leave a comrade behind. He looked at Rusty, whose ears stood tall, gaze steady. The shepherd's calm steadiness told him what he already knew. This wasn't just a broken family case. It was something larger, darker. Caroline straightened, slipping the USB into her coat pocket. "I'll see if I can get this looked at discreetly. But Jack, if North Star is really fabricating records about children, this isn't just fraud. It's dangerous. People don't vanish without reason." Jack's storm gray eyes locked on hers, cold fury simmering beneath the surface. "Then we find out what happened to Anna. And we protect her kids." Rusty gave a sharp huff, tail thumping once against the floor, as if sealing the vow. The three of them, Jack, Caroline, and Rusty, stood in silent accord, the outlines of a dark puzzle beginning to form. And though the storm outside raged on, inside the cabin, a fragile alliance had been forged, one that would soon uncover truths the city of Riverside Falls had tried to bury. The storm had softened by morning, leaving Riverside Falls wrapped in a blanket of brittle silence, its streets glazed with ice. Jack guided his battered truck down the narrow roads, the heater straining against the cold. In the back seat, Emma and Ella sat bundled in layers of blankets, their small faces still pale, but less pinched than the night before. Rusty, the 6-year-old German shepherd, sat erect beside them, ears pricked and amber eyes scanning the snowy scenery beyond the frosted window. Caroline Brooks sat in the passenger seat, her hazel eyes sharp with thought, a manila folder resting in her lap. Her auburn hair, tied in a practical bun, had loosened strands from the damp, and her pale skin was shadowed by lack of sleep. She leaned forward as they approached a squat brick building with peeling paint and a sagging sign that read, Bright Pines Community Clinic. Jack parked along the curb. "This the place?" he asked, his voice low. Caroline nodded. "Bright Pines, one of North Star's partner facilities. Anna mentioned it once, said she suspected they were processing files here, but she didn't have proof." She looked at Jack with a grim set to her jaw. If Anna really poked around, this is where she would have started. The clinic's front door opened with a weary groan. The waiting room was dim, furnished with cracked vinyl chairs and a coffee table stacked with outdated magazines. A heater rattled somewhere in the walls, failing to push back the chill. A young receptionist sat behind the counter, shoulders hunched inside an oversized sweater. Her name tag read Lydia Gray. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her brown eyes flickered nervously when she saw Jack, Caroline, and the children enter. Lydia's face was round, framed by chestnut hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Her skin was pale, the complexion of someone who spent little time outdoors, and her demeanor carried the unease of someone forced into a role she didn't fully trust. "Can I help you?" Lydia asked, her voice quiet, carrying the careful cadence of someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. Caroline stepped forward, her professional tone calm but firm. "We're here to review some records. Administrative, for cross-checking with North Star." She placed a reassuring hand on the counter. "We won't be long." Lydia hesitated, her fingers curling against the edge of her desk. She opened her mouth as if to object, but then her eyes flicked to the German shepherd now padding silently across the room. Rusty's gaze was fixed, his nose twitching. The young woman bit her lip, then quickly ducked through a door behind her without another word. Jack's instincts prickled. "She's scared," he muttered. Caroline nodded. "Which means there's something here she doesn't want us to see, or something she's been told not to let us find." Moments later, Lydia returned, her eyes downcast. "Records are in the back," she said, her voice thin. She motioned for them to follow. They walked through a short hallway that smelled of bleach, its paint peeling, and entered a storage room lined with tall metal filing cabinets. The air was heavy with a sharp chemical odor that stung Jack's nose. He frowned. "This isn't just disinfectant," he said, his voice flat. "It's stronger, like solvents." Rusty stiffened, tail rising. The shepherd prowled the rows of cabinets, sniffing hard. His paws clicked against the linoleum, his muscles taut. Suddenly he stopped at one cabinet, let out a deep bark, and began pawing furiously at the bottom drawer. The sound of his claws against metal echoed through the small room. Jack pulled the drawer open, coughing as a stronger wave of bleach rolled out. Inside, folders lay damp and warped, their ink smudged, pages sticking together. Someone had soaked them deliberately. Caroline swore under her breath. "They tried to destroy them." Jack pulled out a file, spreading it carefully on the table. The paper was warped, the handwriting bleeding into a blur, but a signature at the bottom stood out. Howard Kane. Caroline's hazel eyes hardened. "He signed these, director of North Star himself." She flipped through another salvaged file, her fingers quick but precise. "Look at this. Records say a child named Peter Langley was transferred to a foster facility in another state. But I know that facility. They reported 0 new intakes that month." Jack's storm gray eyes narrowed. "So the kid never arrived. On paper he exists. In reality, he disappears." He set the file down heavily. "And there are more like him, aren't there?" Caroline pulled out another folder, this one half burned at the edges. The same pattern emerged. Children listed as moved, but no trail beyond these papers, all signed by Kane. The weight of it pressed into the room, the silence broken only by the low growl rumbling in Rusty's throat. Emma clutched her teddy bear tighter, her small face pale. "That's why Mama cried," she whispered. Jack turned sharply, but softened when he saw the fear in her eyes. "She knew," Emma added. "She told us the papers were lies." Jack rubbed a hand over his beard, fury burning low beneath his skin. The veteran in him recognized corruption when he saw it. He had fought wars overseas only to find a different kind of war hidden in his hometown. He looked at Caroline, his voice steady but heavy with resolve. "Anna found this. That's why she vanished." Caroline nodded, her eyes shining with both anger and exhaustion. "She touched something too dangerous, and now we're standing in the middle of it." Rusty pressed against Jack's leg, his steady warmth grounding the soldier's storming mind. The shepherd's amber eyes gleamed with the certainty of instinct. They were no longer chasing shadows. They had stumbled onto the heart of the darkness, and someone had gone to great lengths to cover it up. Jack stared at the ruined files spread across the table, Howard Kane's name written again and again. He felt the weight of Anna's absence, the responsibility of the twins, and the echo of a promise he had once failed to keep. But not this time. This time, he would see it through. The morning sky over Riverside Falls was a dull slate gray, heavy with low clouds that seemed to press down on the city. Jack had not slept properly in days, his mind turning over and over the fractured evidence they had gathered. His cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke from the fire he kept alive through the night, but even its warmth could not ease the tension pulling at his chest. He stood by the window, watching the frost creeping across the glass. Rusty lay at his feet, the 6-year-old German shepherd's black and tan coat rising and falling with steady breaths. Yet, when the phone on the counter buzzed, the dog's ears pricked instantly, as if sensing what Jack already feared. Trouble. Caroline Brooks' voice came through, clipped and urgent. "Jack, it's North Star headquarters. There's a fire. Dispatch says it spread too quickly to be an accident." Her tone was taut, her usually calm words laced with something sharper. Jack's hand clenched around the receiver. The memories of combat zones came flooding back, flames rising against the night sky, screams mingling with the crackle of burning structures. He pushed them down. "I'll meet you there," he said flatly. By the time Jack's truck skidded to a halt outside the North Star administrative facility, smoke was already billowing skyward, thick and black, staining the sky. Fire engines crowded the street, their red lights flashing against the curtain of smoke. Firefighters in heavy gear rushed back and forth, their boots splashing in puddles of melted snow. The sharp stench of burning paper and chemicals clawed at Jack's nose. A firefighter broke away from the group and approached. His name tag read Sean O'Malley, a man in his early 40s with a broad chest, stocky build, and thick dark beard glistening with sweat despite the bitter air. His Irish features were partly obscured by his soot-marked helmet, but his deep-set hazel eyes were clear, steady, the kind of eyes of a man used to crisis. "Record's wing went up fast," O'Malley said, pulling his respirator aside briefly. "Spread too even, too quick. Smells like accelerants. We've got it mostly contained, but the ceiling could give at any minute." Jack felt Rusty's body tense beside him, the shepherd already staring toward the smoking entrance. "Any chance we can get inside?" Jack asked, his storm-gray eyes narrowed. O'Malley frowned. "Not long. If you go in, you move fast." He hesitated, then added, "You're crazy if you try, but something tells me you already decided." Jack tugged the respirator over his face, gave Rusty a nod, and together they plunged through the half-open doorway. Inside, heat pressed against him like a living force. The hallway groaned as the building's frame strained under the assault of fire. Ash drifted like black snow, glowing embers floating through the air. Cabinets and desks were warped, blackened. Paper burned in curls, releasing the bitter smell of ink and chemicals. Rusty kept close, his paws quick, ears alert. The shepherd barked sharply, pulling ahead, then darted into a room where flames licked the edges of file cabinets. Jack followed, his boots crunching across broken glass. Rusty stood rigid near a desk, barking louder, pawing furiously at something bolted beneath it. Jack crouched, coughing against the smoke. His gloved hands touched hot metal, a black server box, still intact though scorched. "Good boy," he muttered, straining to loosen the bolts. Sparks cracked overhead as the ceiling shifted dangerously. Just as Jack ripped the server free, a steel beam shrieked and began to give way. "Move, Rusty!" Jack shouted. slinging the box under his arm and lunging toward the doorway. The ceiling buckled, sending wood and plaster crashing down. Rusty leapt forward, his powerful jaws seizing Jack's sleeve, yanking him sideways just as the debris slammed into the floor where he had been. The soldier staggered, heart pounding, clutching the server. Rusty pressed against his leg, growling at the fire as though daring it to try again. They burst into the freezing air outside, smoke clinging to their clothes. O'Malley cursed when he saw the server cradled against Jack's chest. Lucky bastards, that whole wing's about to collapse. Jack bent, catching his breath, and dropped a hand to Rusty's head. The shepherd panted, chest heaving, but his amber eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. "You saved my life again, partner," Jack whispered hoarsely. Hours later, the precinct's tech lab hummed with the quiet buzz of machines. The air smelled faintly of melted plastic and stale coffee. At a desk sat Elliot Tron, mid-30s, a slim man with sharp cheekbones, jet-black hair slicked back, and thin glasses perched low on his nose. Ink stains smudged his long fingers, the mark of a man who lived among files and code. Elliot was not warm in demeanor. He spoke little, preferring machines to people, but his eyes carried a glint of restless intelligence. "Most of this server's fried," Elliot muttered as he connected the scorched box to his system. "But maybe we can salvage fragments." Lines of code danced across the monitors, fractured but alive. He tapped rapidly, his hands moving with machine-like precision. Jack stood nearby, arms folded across his broad chest, his stubble-darkened jaw set tight. Caroline arrived soon after, her trench coat damp from the snow, her hazel eyes fixed on the screens. The monitor flickered, then grainy video filled the screen. A tall, broad-shouldered man appeared, late 30s, face shadowed with stubble, hair cropped close. He carried a red fuel can in his hand. His heavy boots echoed as he moved through the North Star facility, glancing around with the caution of someone accustomed to dangerous work. Jack felt his stomach tighten. "That's him," Caroline whispered. "Dale Mercer." Jack knew the name. Mercer had worked private security, a man with a reputation for silence and muscle. In the footage, Mercer poured accelerant across file cabinets, struck a match, then stepped back as flames roared to life. Moments later, another figure entered the frame. This one wore a cap pulled low, his face hidden, but the van outside bore a logo that froze everyone in place: North Star Family Services. Mercer accepted a canvas bag from the second figure, its weight evident as he hefted it. "Payment," Caroline said bitterly, her jaw tightening. "They paid him to burn the evidence." Elliot paused the frame, zooming in until the North Star emblem was clear on the van's door. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by Rusty's low growl. Jack exhaled slowly. "This isn't just corruption. This is a cover-up. And now, we have proof." Rusty pressed his head against Jack's side, his body warm against the chill that had seeped into Jack's bones. The shepherd's amber eyes shone with certainty, as if to say they were finally on the right path. The Cedar Grand Hotel rose like a glittering jewel in the heart of Riverside Falls, its glass facade reflecting the pale glow of streetlights against a winter's night. Inside, golden chandeliers spilled radiance over a ballroom adorned with white linens and polished silverware. The air was scented faintly with roses and champagne, the kind of perfumed luxury that masked everything rotten beneath the surface. Tonight, North Star Family Services was hosting a charity gala, an evening meant to dazzle donors and silence whispers of doubt. Jack adjusted the collar of his black suit as he entered through the side doors, his frame broad enough that the tailored jacket strained slightly at his shoulders. His storm-gray eyes swept the room with the wary gaze of a soldier who had seen too many traps hidden beneath velvet curtains. Rusty padded at his side, the German shepherd's sleek black and tan coat brushed until it gleamed under the lights. Tonight he wore only a simple leather collar, presented as a special guest performer to entertain the crowd. Yet Jack knew his partner's real role was far more dangerous. Caroline Brooks blended seamlessly among the donors, her auburn hair styled elegantly into a twist, her dark emerald gown chosen for simplicity rather than glamour. Her hazel eyes, however, betrayed the tension in her chest. Every move was calculated, every smile restrained, the armor of a woman who had spent years fighting for children others forgot. She kept close to the refreshment table, her clutch bag hiding a recording device. Near the bar stood Detective Marcus Hale, a tall man of 41, with dark skin, a clean-shaven head, and shoulders that stretched his navy blazer uncomfortably. Marcus was not built for parties. His square jaw and steady brown eyes spoke of a man used to interrogation rooms, not champagne flutes. Still, his posture was relaxed enough to pass as a guest, though Jack caught the subtle flick of his eyes toward every exit. Marcus had seen investigations crumble when corruption reached too high, and tonight his resolve was ironclad. The room stirred when the host arrived. Howard Kane, late 50s, strode with practiced grace. His silver hair was combed immaculately, his tuxedo flawless, his cold blue eyes scanning the crowd like a general counting soldiers. Applause rippled as he mounted the stage, his smile polished but empty. At his side walked Councilwoman Martha Lell, tall and lean in a sapphire gown, her blonde hair styled in soft waves, her diamond earrings glinting with every turn of her regal head. Martha's voice carried the warmth of a seasoned politician, but her pale gray eyes betrayed calculation rather than compassion. "Tonight," Howard began, his baritone smooth, "we celebrate our mission to guide children from darkness into light. With leaders like Councilwoman Lell at our side, we will expand our reach and ensure every child's future." Martha stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "It is my honor to stand with North Star in this noble cause." Polite applause swelled, but Caroline's hand tightened around her clutch. She exchanged a quick glance with Jack across the room. At that moment, Elliot Tran, the precinct's quiet technician, dressed in a black staff vest, slipped into the AV booth at the back. His pale face glowed in the dim light of the monitors, fingers steady as he keyed the sequence. The massive screen behind the podium flickered. At first, guests murmured, thinking it part of the program. Then the image sharpened. Dale Mercer, broad-shouldered, late 30s, carrying a red fuel can as flames engulfed North Star's records room. His stubble-darkened jaw was set in grim determination as he poured accelerant over files, then accepted a canvas bag from a van bearing North Star's emblem. Gasps spread like wildfire through the ballroom. The footage gave way to scanned pages of Anna Miller's notebook, meticulous handwriting listing duplicate claims, phantom children, and payments funneled through shell companies. Names of missing children appeared in sharp black ink, a roll call of the silenced. Finally, GPS logs from Sophie's recovered USB traced North Star vans to hidden river properties. The music died. The air seemed to collapse under the weight of revelation. Donors froze mid-toast, their smiles curdled. Reporters jolted upright, pens scratching furiously. Martha's painted smile faltered, her face draining of color though her chin remained lifted. Howard's jaw tightened, the mask slipping from his face. At the edge of the room, Mercer himself had been stationed near an exit, his eyes widening as the screen exposed his crime. Panic rippled across his rugged features. Sweat slicked his temple as he shoved past a server, making a break for the kitchen doors. "Rusty!" Jack commanded. The shepherd exploded into motion, a blur of muscle and precision. He lunged across the ballroom, jaws clamping onto Mercer's forearm before the man could reach the handle. Mercer bellowed, stumbling backward, chairs toppling as guests shrieked. Rusty's weight drove him to the carpet, immobilizing but not mauling, his amber eyes blazing with duty. The ballroom doors burst open. Dark-suited FBI agents surged in, their badges flashing under the chandeliers. Weapons drawn, voices sharp. "Howard Kane, you are under arrest," one barked. Another turned on Martha Lell. "Step away from the podium, Councilwoman." Chaos erupted. Donors shouted, journalists snapped photos, waiters ducked behind trays. Howard tried to speak, his baritone now a roar of fury. "This is slander, lies." But his protests only amplified through the microphone as two agents cuffed him, cameras capturing every angle. Martha remained poised even as her wrists were bound, her gray eyes icy, but her dignity crumbled under the shouts of betrayal from the crowd. Jack strode forward, Rusty trotting at his side, Mercer still pinned until agents wrenched him up in irons. The soldier's gaze swept the chaos, his heart pounding with grim satisfaction. For months, perhaps years, children had vanished into North Star's shadows. Tonight, the shadows had been torn wide open. The news broke like a crack through ice. Dale Mercer, cornered and defeated after his capture at the gala, confessed under the relentless questioning of federal agents. His voice was gravelly, his broad shoulders hunched, as if the weight of betrayal had finally crushed him. He revealed that Anna Miller had not been killed, but hidden, locked away in a remote psychiatric facility on the outskirts of Riverside Falls, where questions were smothered and silence was currency. Jack stood in the cold dawn outside the FBI field office, the breath rising in white plumes from his mouth. Rusty pressed against his side, the German shepherd's amber eyes bright with focus. Jack had spent years haunted by battles abroad, but the war he fought now, one for 2 innocent children and their mother, burned deeper in his chest. When the convoy rolled out toward the facility, he climbed into the lead vehicle, storm-gray eyes fixed on the road. The Riverside Rest Center stood behind iron gates, a squat building with beige concrete walls and barred windows. The sign outside, painted in cheerful green letters, felt grotesque against the reality within. Armed federal agents fanned out quickly, their dark coats blending with the snowy backdrop. Jack followed, his heavy boots crunching across the frozen ground. At the entrance, a tall woman in her 50s stepped forward, her iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Margaret Dwyer, head nurse of the facility, had a sharp, angular frame, her pale skin drawn tight against high cheekbones. She wore a pristine white coat, but her thin lips were pursed in defiance, and her slate-colored eyes were cold. "This is highly irregular," she said sharply, her voice clipped, the tone of someone who had spent years bending rules in silence. "Our patients are under confidentiality. You can't just barge in." Detective Marcus Hale, standing to Jack's right, produced the court order with steady hands. His deep voice carried calm authority. "We can, and we will. Step aside, Nurse Dwyer." Margaret's jaw clenched, but the sight of armed agents and Rusty's steady growl convinced her otherwise. With a stiff gesture, she signaled toward the corridor. The group moved swiftly down dim hallways that smelled faintly of antiseptic and damp plaster. The doors were numbered, the air thick with resignation. Rusty padded ahead, nose twitching, his tail stiff as a mast. Suddenly he stopped at a door near the end of the corridor, whining low in his throat. Jack's heart lurched. The door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room. Anna Miller sat on the edge of a narrow cot, her body gaunt, shoulders hunched beneath a pale hospital gown. Once auburn, her hair now hung dull and chestnut, streaked with gray. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, which lifted slowly as the light broke into her cell. Her frame trembled as if she barely had the strength to rise. When Jack stepped forward, his boots scuffing against the concrete floor, she whispered, her voice cracked from disuse. "Sophie? Emma? Ella?" Jack crouched low, his voice gentler than he had ever managed on the battlefield. "Your daughters are safe. They're waiting for you." The despair in Anna's gaze shattered, replaced by a fragile spark of life. Tears welled as she staggered to her feet, her knees buckling. Jack reached out to steady her, his hand rough and steady on her thin arm. Rusty pressed close, sniffing at her gown, then leaned against her side as though recognizing the scent of the woman who had once written the truths in her notebook. Anna let out a trembling laugh through her tears, brushing her weak hand along the shepherd's head. "You found me," she whispered. 2 days later, the precinct became the setting for reunion. In the lobby, Emma and Ella waited, their small frames wrapped in fresh coats. When Anna entered, frail but alive, the twins burst forward, colliding against her with desperate sobs. Anna dropped to her knees, clutching them, her tears wetting their hair. "I thought I lost you," she choked out. "Never," Emma whispered back fiercely, her tiny arms clinging as if they would never release. Ella buried her face in her mother's chest, her muffled cries speaking volumes. Caroline Brooks stood to the side, her hazel eyes glistening. Years of fighting bureaucracy, pleading for lost children, and defying silence. All of it found purpose in this moment. Even Marcus, a man whose composure was usually granite, turned slightly away, jaw tight as he swallowed his emotion. Jack leaned against the wall, Rusty at his side, his lips pressing into a rare, quiet smile. Justice came swiftly after the gala and Mercer's confession. In a high-profile trial that drew every headline in the state, Howard Kane was sentenced to life in prison for fraud, kidnapping, and human trafficking. The polished silver-haired director who once charmed donors now wore the gray uniform of a convict, his cold blue eyes dulled by defeat. Martha Lell, stripped of her council seat, was convicted of corruption and complicity, her regal bearing collapsing in a concrete cell. Dale Mercer, whose stubble-shadowed face once hid in firelight, received decades behind bars, his silence finally broken only to seal his fate. In contrast, Rusty stood proudly on the precinct steps one bright morning, the winter sun scattering light across his black and tan coat. Officers gathered in full dress uniform, their badges gleaming. Chief Robert Mallory, a tall man with graying temples and a booming voice, fastened a Medal of Valor to Rusty's vest. Applause echoed, cameras flashed, and Rusty tilted his head curiously, amber eyes calm as if wondering why the fuss. Jack knelt, scratching behind his partner's ear. "You earned it, buddy," he murmured. Later, Jack, Anna, the twins, and Rusty returned to Riverside Park. The wooden bench where Emma and Ella had once sat, abandoned under the storm, now basked beneath golden sunlight. Snow still lay on the ground, but the cold felt softer, no longer hostile. Anna sat with her arms wrapped around her daughters, her thin frame stronger with hope. The girls pressed close to Rusty, giggling when his warm breath tickled their cheeks. Jack stood nearby, the weight in his chest finally easing. For the first time in years, he felt peace, because justice had not only been served, but had blossomed into something brighter. The harsh winter had yielded, leaving in its wake the fragile promise of spring, and beneath the snow, hope had taken root. Sometimes, miracles do not come with thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, in the loyalty of a German shepherd, in the steady courage of a weary soldier, or in the fragile hope of two little girls who refused to give up. Just as Anna and her daughters found light again beneath the darkest winter, we too are reminded that God's hand often moves through the simplest acts of love and compassion. In our daily lives, we may pass by someone sitting in silence, carrying invisible burdens. We may overlook a small cry for help, thinking it is nothing. But it is often in those overlooked moments that God calls us to act, to listen, to comfort, to protect. That is where His miracles begin. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and let us know where you are watching from. We are a community bound not by distance, but by faith and kindness. Don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep spreading stories of loyalty, redemption, and the power of love. May God bless you and your loved ones with strength, peace, and protection in every step of your daily life. And may we all remember, never ignore the small voice, never overlook the forgotten soul, for that is often where His miracles begin.